Happy National Fossil Day, everybody, and welcome to our Let's Tour live stream presented by the Alf Museum and the Western Science Center. I'm your host, Brittany Stoberg, along with my co-host, Gabriel Santos.
What's up, everybody?
And for today's event, we are asking the question, why are museum collections important? I think when a lot of us think about museums, we think about the exhibit displays, but there's a lot more to it than that. And so that's why we're going to go behind the scenes with museums across the country today to figure out why these collections are important. So we're going to have questions and answers, we're going to have tours, so I hope you're really excited to join us. Just a reminder, we are all in a global pandemic, so all of our museum guests today have been doing their utmost to make sure they are safe while showing their collections. You can see Dr. Victor Perez here is in a mask. We are being very careful to make sure we do not contribute to the spread. So let's get started. We are today with the Calvert Marine Museum with Dr. Victor Perez. Hi, Victor.
Hello. So, are you going to do more there, Brittany?
Oh. It's the eternal Zoom call challenge, is not talking over each other, isn't it? No, whenever you are ready, Victor. And again, if anybody has questions for Victor after the tour of the collections, go ahead and drop them in the chat. We will do our best to answer as many as we have time to do so.
All right. Thanks, Brittany. So my name is Victor Perez. I am the Assistant Curator of Paleontology here at the Calvert Marine Museum. And behind the camera, we have John Nance, who is our Collections Manager for the Paleontology Department. So our museum is fairly small, probably smaller than any of the other museums you might see during these tours today. But we really have three areas that our museum covers. So we have the Paleontology Department that you're going to see today. We have estuarine biology, and we have maritime history. Our museum is very much based around Calvert County and our local history. So the museum started in 1970. So actually this month we're celebrating our 50th year anniversary. So yes, woo to us. But our paleontology department really took off about 10 years later than that. In 1981, the Calvert Marine Museum Fossil Club was established, and that's really when the paleontology department really started to take off. So for about 40 years, our museum has been primarily running off of volunteer work. So we have 3 full-time paleontologists that work on staff here, and a lot more volunteers that help us out. We really couldn't do much without their help. So as I mentioned, our museum is very much locally based. We have a famous fossil area called the Calvert Cliffs, which is Miocene in age, about 20 to 7.5 million years old. But I believe it was in 2018, we were named Maryland's State Paleontological Center. So that kind of expanded our scope to be statewide. We also will do trips outside of the state because fossil layers are not limited to state lines. So we often travel into Virginia to study some of the fossils there. But mostly what we have is going to be from the Calvert Cliffs, and it's going to be Miocene in age. And this is a marine environment, a shallow sea. So I'm going to show you a little bit about what we have here. So we pan over. You can see here we have these compactors. So this helps us kind of keep things in a tight space because we are very limited as to what we have space for here. We have about 100,000 catalog specimens in our museum. So let's zoom in and take a look at some of them. So as we look down, we have a table full of fossils here. These are things that are in the queue to be cataloged in the museum. And if we pan to the other side, we have shelves of the same, more fossils that are in the process of being cataloged. And everything in the compactors are things that have already been processed, cataloged, and entered into our database. So I'm going to back up and we're going to look at some of these drawers. So my area of research is the fossil record of sharks and rays. So I conveniently set us up in the aisle that has most of our sharks and rays. So I'm going to kind of choose a drawer at random here and just pull out so you can see how this looks. So I get my cameraman to zoom in here. What you're seeing is we have a lot of fossil sand tiger sharks here, and then we have the ancestor of the great white shark, Karkarkali histalis, up above. And then let's go. It shows 3 different drawers there. Okay. Up here, probably our museum favorite is Karkarkali's Megalodon. So this was from the largest shark that ever lived. So about 6 years ago, I actually worked here as an intern. And while I was here, we were doing a project looking at the evolution of Megalodon. And one of the things we did was look at how many teeth we had and where they were coming from in terms of who collected them. And 98% of the teeth, 98% of the Megalodon teeth were collected by amateur or avocational paleontologists, which means these are not people that are trained as paleontologists, but rather practicing it because they really enjoy it and they want to support the science. So as I mentioned, our museum is heavily based on volunteer work, and we have a really, really strong community of volunteers that help us out. We're actually in the process of working on a fossil record of sharks. This is one of the specimens that will be part of that exhibit. This is a composite dentition of Karkarkali histalis, that ancestor of the great white shark. And we also have some more trays of other interesting fossils out that will be included in this exhibit. So here's one of probably the most interesting fossils in our collection. This is called a coprolite, or fossilized feces, and you see these little indentations along it. This is actually bite marks from where a shark bit into this coprolite, decided it didn't like it, and spit out, and that actually preserved. And we were able to take a silicon mold of those impressions, and from the shape of the mold, we can tell you that it was a tiger shark that actually bit into this coprolite anywhere from 10 to 20 million years ago. Here's another example of a coprolite that was bitten by a shark. This one's actually from South Carolina, but here's 2 instances of that, so it can't be that rare of an occurrence. So outside of sharks, we do get a lot of other fossils. Probably our biggest issue in terms of space is our marine mammals. We get a lot of whales and dolphins. So on the back wall here, we have some plaster jackets of different whales and dolphins that have been excavated along the cliffs, and we took off the lid of one of them here for you to see. This is called Hydrodelphus. So you have the skull in the back up here, and then the rostrum coming out, and a series of teeth all preserved. So we do happen to come across quite a few of these. In fact, 2 weeks ago, we just excavated a partial baleen whale skull out of the cliffs. So we're constantly working to preserve the fossil record in the area. Outside of our vertebrate fossils, we have a lot of invertebrates. So this is a fossil snail shell called Ecphora. This is actually Maryland's state fossil. So this is a very popular icon in our area. We also have trace fossils of different invertebrates. So this is likely from a ghost shrimp, but we don't know for sure. And on rare occasion, we will find fossil plant material. Here's a fossil pine cone from the Calvert Cliffs, and you can see all the shell material in the sediment around it. And even though this is a marine environment, we do get some other evidence of terrestrial life. So here's a tooth of a gomphothere, or elephant-like animal that lived in the past. There's actually a book chapter that's being written on the land mammals of the Calvert Cliffs, and this is one of the specimens that will be included in that chapter. So if we pan over again, you can see some more of the fossil shark material that we've pulled out that's going to be included in our upcoming exhibit. So some of our beautiful Megalodon teeth. We also have other parts of the shark beyond teeth. So this is a vertebra or centrum, so part of the backbone of a basking shark. and a tail spine of a very, very large stingray. And in addition to biting on fossilized coprolite, sometimes these sharks will also be biting down on the whale and dolphin. So this is the radius of one of our whales. And if you look very closely, there's different sets of bite marks all along it. So likely it's some kind of scavenging event on this fossil. Here's another example. Here is a cetacean whale or dolphin vertebra. We know it was a juvenile because its growth plate hasn't fused on yet, and it has a large bite mark going through it, and it was actually preserved with this fossil Megalodon tooth that fits right inside of that. So we actually have direct evidence that Megalodon was feeding on this cetacean. All right. So our museum, we as I mentioned, we really are striving to preserve the record of the Calvert Cliffs. And in recent years, we're expanding our mission to be statewide. So next week, we're going to be traveling out to Western Maryland, exploring a new site that is Permian in age, so nearly 300 million year old site. So really getting out of our comfort zone of the last 20 million years or so and trying to expand our knowledge of the fossil record of the entire state. So that's about all I have to show you in our small little area here. Is there any questions, Gabe?
Yeah, we got some questions. That was some really cool stuff, Victor. Thanks for showing us.
Of course.
Really quick before we get over to the other questions, you know, a lot of people think about museums. They think about we go everywhere and collect fossils from many different places and kind of have a huge broad perspective of fossil history. The Calvert Museum is very specific to a location. How do you think that helps in learning more about the past when you have museums dedicated to learning about specific places?
So it certainly focuses our intentions, right? So we started out as a museum that was very much locally based, and we wanted to kind of tell the narrative of the history and the heritage of this area. And the history of this area is basically what's happening along our waterways, people that lived here and the animals that live here now and lived here in the past. So for us, it's a very, very distinct story that we're trying to tell because we have that kind of focused scope of what our museum works on and exhibits.
Cool. Well, thank you. Ready for some questions, Britt?
Yep, absolutely. Here's a question from Brooke asking, any more tips on getting volunteers to help out during the pandemic? How do you as a museum handle your volunteer force when I'm sure a lot of museums like ours, there's some challenges with bringing volunteers in?
Is there any way you could repeat that for me, Gabe? The audio was really soft there.
Oh no, let me try.
Yeah.
Let me try again. So Brooke was asking any tips on getting volunteers to help out at your museum, and especially I guess they're asking about how that works during a pandemic. What do you do with a volunteer force when I'm sure a lot of museums, it's a little more difficult because of COVID?
Sure. So two parts to that question, I guess. How do we get a lot of our volunteers? Well, one thing is the fact that we do have that fossil club that's directly associated with our museum. So we are in a constant partnership between our volunteer workforce and those that work here at the museum through that fossil club. We put on a series of lectures, we do field trips, and lots of different things like that keep constant engagement with our volunteers. The pandemic has definitely made things more difficult. So the area that we're in right now, we are in a separate building from our exhibit side, and we are not allowing volunteers to come over to this side of our space because of COVID. However, over in our exhibit space, we have a prep lab that serves as a live exhibit. So we do have volunteers that are working in the prep lab. But we have taken, some extra precautions because of COVID, only one person working at a time, typically there would be a sliding window that opens so that that person can communicate with the public, but now we're keeping that closed so that there's no direct communication between the volunteer and the public. And we do have every volunteer that works in that area has been assigned their own tools so that they're not exchanging tools and potentially contaminating one another. And lastly, they all sanitize their area after they leave.
Smart. Awesome.
Gotta keep things safe.
Yep. Here's a good question. Ooh, this one's interesting. So this person's asking, I know that some fossil specimens can be radioactive. Is that more common with marine ones?
I don't know that it's necessarily more common with marine fossils. I would think that has more to do with the area that you're collecting in. Like if there's uranium in the sediment where the fossils are preserved, it's not really an issue we've ever had to deal with in this area. I want to say it's out in New Mexico where that has become a challenge for some, but it's certainly outside the scope of our issues.
Okay. Ooh, here is another good question. What controls fossil shark tooth color? So why are the fossils different colors?
So that color is also going to be coming from the sediment that the fossils are preserved in. So depending what elements are in that sediment, for example, if there's lots of iron, that will give it a red to orange color. Another way is once that fossil is loose from the sediment and it gets, let's say, into a river or into the bay, that can affect the color as well. So as plants break down, they release tannins into the water, and those tannins can affect the color of our fossils. Or if a shark tooth is just laying there on the sand and it's exposed to sun, it can bleach and start to fade and kind of lose some of the color. So it's a combination of the sediment, what's the chemistry of the water in the area, or how long has it been exposed to air and sun.
So, okay. Here's a good question. Brooke is asking, I work at a small museum in Missouri. Do you ever collaborate with other museums on digs in the Calvert Cliffs or on any other sites?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see, just last week we had a paleontologist from the Smithsonian that was out on the cliffs with us. We partner with other museums and other schools in the area. So yeah, we're always happy to collaborate with people.
Yep. Museum collaborations, right, Gabe? It's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Another good question: have any fossils of any other age, other than Miocene, been found in your field area?
Yeah, so there's some small areas where we get some reworking. So that is when older sediment gets mixed in with our younger sediment. So we will not often, but rarely on occasion find Eocene and Paleocene fossils. And there's some scarce reports of Cretaceous even, though I have not been able to substantiate that myself. And then higher above that, we have a Pleistocene layer, which is terrestrial. So we'll get some land mammals out of that on occasion too.
More land mammals.
Yay! I know, I'm all about the Miocene land mammals, so this is out of my purview. I love it. Any social media questions, Gabe?
Yeah, here's one. For Victor, what are some of your favorite... Oops, I closed it. What are some of your favorite prep tools and air scribe, sandblast, or pick and brush things for the museum? This is from the Dinosaur podcast.
Okay, so we are mostly using dental picks. We also use toothbrushes, small paintbrushes, things like that. On occasion, we do work in some harder sediment where we have to use an air scribe or even some acid dissolution. But for the Calvert Cliffs area, it's relatively unconsolidated sediment, so we don't need heavy machinery to really get through it. Yeah, so that's mainly what we're going to be using.
Cool. I love using a good old dental pick. It's funny, like sometimes when people ask that, they're like, "Oh, what fancy tools?" And you're like, "I got this secondhand at a dentist's office." So there you go.
Yes, I feel like we're all on pretty good friendly terms with our local dentists. We're like, hey, when you're done.
Our cameraman is shaking his head yes.
Yep.
I have another question from social media. So, let's see. They're asking, Victor, did you always want to work in a museum?
I did. So I grew up in Maryland, about an hour and a half away from here. But when I was 6 years old, I visited this museum. And over in our exhibits building, we actually have an exhibit room called the Discovery Zone. And there's a sandbox where you can find fossils in the sandbox, and an educator will help identify it for you and let you take it home. So I actually got my first shark tooth from this museum when I was 6 years old. And then they told me about how I could go out to the Calvert Cliffs and collect my own fossils, outside in nature. And that kind of set me off on this entire path of wanting to study sharks and work here again.
That is so cool that you have that whole story from a kid getting to work there now. Those are one of like those like paleo storybooks that people should make of you, Victor.
Yeah, in full circle.
I give you the rights to write my story, Gabe.
All right, that's recorded. Everybody heard that. I'm gonna start working on that storybook later today.
Right after we finish this live stream.
Is that a dog?
I apologize. That was my
Oh, that's
dog.
your dog. Okay. Work from home. It happens. All right. Any more questions from the chat, Britt? No? All right. Well, I guess that does it for now. Thank you so much, Victor, for joining us today and teaching us all about the Calvert Marine Museum. If anybody wants to learn more about the museum, where can they go to find out about it?
So we do have an Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter accounts. I believe they are either Calvert Marine Museum or the Calvert Marine Museum on there. We also have a website that you can check out. And the exhibit side of our museum is open to the public with COVID precautions in place. We won't be able to come check out this building, but you can go over there and see more of what we have.
Awesome. Well, I'm really glad that you're able to continue to teach people during this time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if there's any more questions, that does it for this stop on our Let's Tour live stream. Make sure to join us again at 12 o'clock Pacific time as we stop at the Sternberg Museum of Natural History. And as always, if you want to support programs like this at the Western Science Center and the Alf Museum, you can find descriptions in the links below. And if you want to learn more about National Fossil Day from the National Park Services, you can learn more at www.nps.gov. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about paleontology. Thanks again, Victor, and we'll see all of you on our next stop on our Let's Tour. Bye!
Bye!